Hey, everybody, and welcome to Wrestling with Economics. This is Terry Kibbe. I'm here with Matt and Glenn Jacobs. Usually when Matt and I are doing a presentation, I always yell at him every time that he quotes a dead economist. So tonight is going to be a challenge for me because we're going to be talking about all of the dead economists, all of the great minds in the Austrian School. And I can't imagine two better people to do that than Matt Kibbe and Glenn Jacobs, the mayor of Knox County and the iconic WWE wrestler known as Kane.
Hey, Glenn.
Hey, guys. Thanks for having me on.
It's I feel like I just saw you at Ron Paul's 90th birthday party in Lake Jackson. That was such a cool experience. And you got to do some really cool stuff with Dr. Paul.
Yeah, well, you did just see me because that just happened, and it was a really cool experience. And I gave Ron Paul the key to Knox County, which is, for me, just a personal highlight of my tenure as mayor. I never would have imagined that I would have been able to do that, but he's meant a lot to me and a lot to so many people, and that was just a tremendous honor for me to be able to do that.
So I think a lot of the people watching, not everybody, but a lot of people would attribute Dr. Paul planting those seeds, those Easter eggs in his talks, going all the way back to his 2008 run for president, where he was talking about this guy, Ludwig von Mises. And I think people started Googling, who's this Mises guy? What was your, of the economists that turned you on to these ideas and the ideas themselves, what would you say are the biggest and the best?
Obviously, Mises, and he's the godfather, I guess, for lack of a better term, of Austrian economics. The school was actually, founded previous to that, but nevertheless, Mises was the one that brought it to the States. And remarkable, he wrote Human Action, I think, like within just a few years after moving to the States. I don't believe that he spoke English prior to coming to the United States. And he writes this 1,200-page, incredibly dense book with bigger words than I know, and only, and only learned the language a few years before. Just one of the most intelligent people probably in history. Then his student Murray Rothbard, and Rothbard took a lot of Mises' ideas and refined those somewhat. Obviously, they have F.A. Hayek, who won a Nobel Prize in economics. A lot of folks know him from writing The Road to Serfdom, but that was kind of his political side. He has an excellent economic side as well. Speaking of folks like Hayek, then you get into Henry Hazlitt, who wrote what I believe is the best book for layperson on economics, Economics One Lesson. And that's really hearkening back to Frederick Bastiat, who is a French 19th century economist and statesman, who talked about the economic sophisms as well as the broken window parable. So, for me, it's just, it was all of those people. And then you get to Dr. Paul, who also talked a lot about, even though he wouldn't necessarily explicitly say he's talking about Austrian economics, when you're talking about central banking, when you're talking about the Federal Reserve System, monetary policy, that's one of the main areas where the Austrians differ from pretty much everybody else, even, the more free market schools like the Chicago School.
Yeah, like certainly going all the way back to the founder, Karl Menger, the Austrians have been particularly important on developing an economic understanding of money, how it works, how governments screw it up, and leading to their critique of central banking and the business cycle. I should add, for those of you who actually are regulars on Kibbe on Liberty, we have a game that we play for those who partake in alcohol, that every time that I quote a dead economist, and I think Glenn just dropped 6 names, that you should take a sip. So if you don't have a beer and you're into that, do that, because we're going to be talking about all these guys. But the one that is particularly interesting now with cryptocurrency is Frederick Hayek standing on the shoulders of Menger and Mises, talked about the denationalization of money, and he was he was frustrated because he argued that central banking screwed up everything, and he didn't know how to fix it because central banks are so entrenched in modern economies. And he was wondering if there was a sneaky way to get around it. And a lot of the crypto bros will say that that's how he anticipated Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies. What's your take on Bitcoin, Glenn?
I like Bitcoin, and I agree. Anything that can be done to further free market money is very important. I wouldn't say that Hayek envisioned Bitcoin, because obviously the technological advances that were necessary for Bitcoin had not occurred yet. But nevertheless, it is that idea of competing currencies, and the best currency will emerge. And there's nothing stopping the private sector from issuing their own currency, which is what Bitcoin basically is. I'm a precious metal person. I like gold and silver. They've always been money. But what Bitcoin shares with those is that scarcity is built into the algorithm. So I like Bitcoin. Again, I tend to be more on the gold and silver side of things, but I agree with Hayek as well that ultimately it's the market that should decide what money is. And I think that if we had a free market money, we would see different currencies competing, including cryptocurrency, but also the precious metals, and maybe even some fiat currencies.
So this series, when you and I first started talking about doing this, the whole idea was to make these ideas that are so compelling to you and I more accessible to an even broader audience. And if you guys watch the sizzle reel, you'll see that we're actually in a wrestling ring that happens to be where Glenn trained when he was the formidable Kane. Tell us about that ring and some of the times you spent in there.
Yeah, so that ring is actually what we use for training now. I have a school with Dr. Tom Pritchard, who is probably the best pro wrestling trainer in the entire world. But throughout my career, I spent a lot of time in rings a lot like that, whether it was Smoky Mountain Wrestling back in 1995. Back their ring was almost exactly, it might be the same ring, so they're almost exactly like. When you got to WWE, they had a much bigger ring. I think that one's 18 by 18. WWE is 20 by 20, so it's actually a larger ring. What's interesting, though, is they're all constructed differently, so they all kind of feel different. And you have some rings which are more forgiving. You have other rings which are a lot harder. When you hit them, you feel it a lot more. There's also different kinds of ways of doing the ropes. So all of those things actually, play into people just think it's a wrestling ring. But for those of us who've spent a lot of time in wrestling rings, there are different ones. And that one feels pretty good on your body. It doesn't hurt quite as much as some of the others I've been in.
So I wasn't there for the filming of the series, which is one of the things that I regret. And Glenn, you may not know this, but I actually offered cash to our video crew if someone could convince you to choke slam Matt on.
I'm sure you did.
And I'm actually really sad that didn't happen.
It's possible that Terry has choke slammed me once or twice.
That sounds like it.
But if I remember correctly, weren't you initially exposed to these ideas in the locker room of WWE?
Kind of. One of my colleagues, one day we were talking about politics, and I said that I didn't feel that I fit into the pigeonhole of left or right. I mean, I'm very fiscally conservative, but the social issues, especially this is the George W. Bush era of the Republican Party. The social issues, while they're important, I don't think those are things the government should really take that active a role in, as we were saying then. And I was also wondering, we're going around the world, we're the world's policemen. Why are we doing all these things in foreign countries, spending all this money and putting American lives at risk in places that I didn't feel that we belonged? And he mentioned, you sound like, you might be a libertarian. And I told him if that he called me names, I was going to punch him in the face, because I had never heard that term before. But it kind of took me down a rabbit hole, and I think one thing that folks need to remember is libertarianism is a philosophy, and it's a legal system more than anything else. So you see it weaving all through American culture, even in the different parties and throughout our history. Austrian economics, to me, most aligns with the principles of liberty, because basically it's the most free market of the economic schools. The other ones do, rely to some extent on a built-in government intervention, like the monetarists, which, Milton Friedman. And Milton Friedman's a great economist, but never really made that correlation between central banking. He thought that central banking was something that could be controlled, and never really made that connection to the free market in money like the Austrians have. So I guess what I'm trying to say, there are different things. Austrian economics and libertarianism are not quite the same thing, but they really intertwine very nicely.
So we're talking about, we've mentioned this, but let me lay out what we've actually produced with Glenn. It is an 8-part series called Wrestling with Economics, and we deal with not everything, but all the categories that Glenn and I really want to talk about, with an emphasis on things like the business cycle, monetary policy, that sort of thing. And right after we're done with this conversation, you're going to be able to watch for the very first time this series. You're going to be up all night binge watching this. And once we're done talking here, we're going to ask questions. So make sure that you have your questions ready, and Glenn is going to go back in the ring for your questions, and everything is on the table. I want to wrap up this part of the conversation by asking you, are you giving me the sign?
No,
Okay.
Not yet.
By asking you, this is something we get into in the series, but there's something unique about the Austrian school because it's more accessible to regular folks. It's not sort of the technocratic mumbo jumbo that you might get from a modern Keynesian. What's so unique about the Austrians?
Austrian School of Economics it's just common sense. And I could get into all the ways it differs. It's descriptive as opposed to proscriptive, which means it describes things as opposed to saying, this is what you should do. It's also, it's real in that, the Keynesians are studying econometrics. They're looking at numbers and formulas, and they think that people are just going to fit nicely into those numbers and formulas. That is not the case. People have free will, and it's incredibly difficult to say, if you do this, if we put this amount of money out there, this is what people are going to do. We have a much better chance of forecasting the weather because we know exactly, we know how nature works. We know how all the atoms and molecules work, but the weather is so complex with so many different variables that it's literally impossible to know tomorrow what's exactly going to happen. Well, you take that to human beings, which is also incredibly complex and incredibly dynamic, but now you do not have predictable patterns set in stone. And they might be somewhat predictable, but they're not set in stone like they are with the laws of physics and nature of what people are going to do. That's what really separates it. Austrian economics is the study of human action. It's not the study of numbers, which really doesn't have anything to do with economics. Okay? They're completely different things. I was incredibly intimidated when I first started hearing this term Austrian economics because I never took an economics course in school because I don't really like math. I don't like statistics. I don't like algebra. I don't like all that stuff. And I read my first book on Austrian economics. I'm like, wow, there's no formulas. There's very few numbers. And all they are was just to give examples of how things work. And you're exactly right. What's happened now is the people who run the economy, and the economy is run to a great extent. We have embraced the Keynesian system of economics. Well, guess what? if I'm an economist and I'm a big time advisor or a big time economist, I don't want people to understand what I'm talking about, because then I lose my mojo. I'm making a lot of money off this. I'm very powerful. I'm the only person that knows what they're talking about, or my very select circle is the only person that knows, the only people that know what I'm talking about. They're the modern day alchemists. It's literally a pseudoscience now that they are the only people that have the magic code so that they can understand it. And that's by design. They don't want most people to understand what they're talking about, because if people actually understood it, they would realize this is a bunch of bunk. The same rules that apply to me and my interactions with other people, there's no difference between macroeconomics and microeconomics except for the scale. The same laws apply. But if you're a big time economist and you're advising governments and you're teaching in the classroom and all this stuff, you want to be able to say, look, we can control these things. And problem is they can't control these things. And the more that they try, the worse the situation gets. And then frankly, we've seen that. And Hayek warned about that in his Nobel Prize speech, the fatal conceit, this idea that economists could control the economy. It's just not possible.
All right, with that, we're going to show the sizzle reel of the series that Matt had mentioned before. And while that's being streamed, place your questions that you want to ask in the comments on X or the comments on YouTube, and we'll see them here. And, ask us anything.
Started hearing this term, Austrian economics. He said, you sound like a libertarian. I'd never heard that term before. I actually told him if he continued to insult me, I was going to punch him in the face. Austrian economics is kind of the populist wing of economics. Well, wow, this is actually about people. And economics is not about numbers. People are a lot smarter than they think they are. We just have to have things explained to us in a way that we can understand.
We're going to wrestle with ideas right now, and you are going to walk us through some of the most important ideas of the Austrian School of Economics.
By the way, Frederick Hayek and his citation of his Nobel Prize speech about the fatal conceit, that gets a sip. Thank you.
All right. So the first question is, what are some good books to start with to learn more about Austrian economics?
The two books that I would recommend are What Has Government Done to Our Money by Murray Rothbard. If you read that, you will understand more about monetary theory than probably any PhD level economist. And the second book I'd recommend is Economics 1 Lesson by Henry Hazlitt. It's a little bit dated now. It's written, I think, in the 50s, maybe the 40s. So it talks about some things that the examples he give maybe aren't timely, but the concepts that he talks about are timeless.
Cool. What is the Austrian take on tariffs and trade deficits?
Yeah, so that is very interesting, because the Austrians look at the economy as basically there's no political boundaries with the economy. One of the issues with when different countries concentrate on certain things, different individuals even concentrate on certain things through the division of labor, you have higher productivity. Okay, so if you're trying to grow bananas in Alaska, you have to build greenhouses and temperature control and all those sort of things. It ain't going to work. You can grow bananas much better in Central America, but you can get salmon and other stuff in Alaska. So the Austrian view is to concentrate on things that you're good at and to produce those, which raises overall productivity. So for the Austrians, tariffs are something that they would not approve of. I think politically, when you look at how our country was formed, the tariffs were there as a revenue generation more than anything else. But over the years, they've become much more protectionist. That their role is much more protectionist now than it was in the past.
Oh, now we're getting into, I knew we were going to get to this question soon. How does ending the Fed tie into moving towards more of an Austrian system? You can't have a conversation without talking about
that's one of the core things that the modern Austrian movement would really like to see. The Fed to us is the root of all evil. When you have a centralized bureaucracy controlling money, controlling the money supply, controlling the price of money through interest rates, that you can point to virtually all of our economic issues, and the Fed is at the root of that. The boom bust cycle that is caused by central banking, and all these other things that we see throughout our economy. A lot of that goes directly back to central banking. Even on the political front, you think about big government, you think about the wars around the world and all those things. They wouldn't be possible if the Fed weren't printing money. Okay, if you actually had to tax people, first of all, you couldn't tax them high enough. We see that with our national debt. You couldn't tax them enough. But you just politically, you wouldn't be able to do those things because you would have to actually directly tax people instead of hiding that tax in inflation. So it's a huge deal, not only for those of us who subscribe to the Austrian School, but also those of us who believe in small government. It's the Fed that empowers the growth in government that we've seen over the past 100 years.
And by the way, it's the most important issue for anyone that tries to fill their grocery basket for the same amount that they were paying just a couple years ago. Inflation, printing of dollars through the Federal Reserve or any central bank, is the most insidious form of taxation, transferring wealth from working people to an elite class that sort of feeds off of that system.
Yeah.
Right,
I mean, we saw that, during COVID. It was actually a massive wealth transfer. And again, a lot of the reason for that is because with the bailouts that happened, that money didn't find its way into everybody's pocket. It starts with the rich and the wealthy and the politically connected. Then they're able to make investments before the inflation hits, price inflation, and hurts everyone else. So yes, every time you hear about the government and the Fed bailing something out, what they're really doing is transferring wealth to the politically connected.
Yep. So Rich Leach says, talk about how your understanding of the Austrian School affected your decisions as mayor.
For the most, as much as I possibly can, I try to ensure that taxes stay low, that people keep as much of their own money as they possibly can. As well as I just don't want the government to be involved in a lot of things. That's my overall philosophy, obviously, but we coordinate much more with nonprofits, the faith-based community than other governments might. We don't just hand money out willy-nilly, because all those things have impacts. At my level, some of these things, like I don't control federal spending, or I can't tell the Fed what to do. I don't have anything to do with monetary theory. So I would actually say the bigger question is, how do we deal with what the Fed does? Because as a local government, we're subject to inflation too. I have to figure out how are we going to be able to keep up and pay our bills without raising taxes when we see inflation raging, especially like it did during COVID. So that's something to really keep in mind is, when it comes to the federal government, they're up there printing money, and when they're running deficits, literally they just have this big piggy bank and this printing press that can just reel it out and cover it. We can't do that at the local level. But when that printing press cranks up, the issues that it causes with price inflation, they impact us just like they do everybody else.
So no printing press in Knox County.
And nope, ain't gonna see one either, brother. But it does. It makes things very difficult, because there are things that we have to do, whether it's fill potholes, build roads, cut the grass. We have to pay people and remain competitive. It becomes very difficult when we see inflation, eating away at our dollars too.
Just tell this story briefly, but I know that you got to visit with Deborah Birx during lockdowns, and you were one of those bad guys that refused to lock down and comply. You got yourself in some trouble.
Well, I actually didn't, but I realized that when Deborah Birx came to Knoxville, I realized I didn't need any more evidence that what was happening was a farce. She came to Knoxville. She was making a tour of SEC towns and universities. So our media is like, oh my gosh, COVID's so bad, Birx is coming. That wasn't the reason. She was just traveling around the country. Anyway, so we were in this room at the University of Tennessee, huge conference room, probably 20 people, all wearing masks, all sitting 45 feet apart. But the funniest thing was you would think that you'd wear the mask when you're talking because that's when it captures spittle, right? Well, no one could hear anyone when they were talking. So we would all take our masks down to talk, but then put them back up to listen. I was like, so everybody in this room, with the exception of me, has a PhD or an MD. And we're all sitting around 20 feet apart wearing masks. Someone asked Burke what would be her advice. And she said, you need to close your bars and restaurants. Now, to their credit, one of the people with a PhD or an MD said, well, Dr. Birx, the data shows that it doesn't spread at bars and restaurants. And her reply was, this is very scientific. Her reply was, well, that's true, but we have to show this is a serious situation. That's when I realized the whole thing was just PR and it was just marketing. Here she is, and she's this authority figure, supposedly has all this data. And later you would find that her data was publicly available. She was just pulling stuff off the internet, Googling, just like the rest of us were. It wasn't like she had any treasure trove of her own stuff that she go through. But yeah. So it was basically, PR. And then in her memoir, obviously, that's what she says. She says the whole time, that they were recommending things to President Trump at the time. They knew what the end game was. And it wasn't 15 days to flatten the curve or 30 days to slow the spread. It was lockdowns. And she knew that from the beginning and lied about it.
So that meeting sounds like an episode of Parks and Recreation. In hindsight, at the time, they were just destroying people's lives, but now it seems like a dark comedy.
Yeah, but I think it's very important, though, that we never forget what happened during COVID. That was the closest that we've come, at least in my lifetime, to just outright tyranny in this country. Just completely unconstitutional, elected officials, governors acting like tyrants and kings, and they don't need a legislature to just say you can't go to work. Property rights were just trampled, religious freedom trampled, freedom of speech trampled, censorship. We look back and now, as you say, it just seems like sort of a dark comedy, but it was a very serious time. And if that had been allowed to continue, I don't think it would have, because I think the American people got fed up with it. But if that had been allowed to continue, I don't know where our country would be.
Yeah, in DC, so I'm going to go down the rabbit hole of COVID, which is usually Matt's job. But in DC, they had shut down all the bars and restaurants, and they were going to reopen on January 15th, 2021. And that was a very scientifically chosen date because it was 5 days before the inauguration. So they wanted to have the restaurants open so that people could go out and celebrate Biden being inaugurated. But then January 6th happened, and the mayor decided that she didn't want anyone coming to the city at all because she was so worried about what was going to happen. So she extended the date of the shutdown of the restaurants to January 31st. So the power that they grabbed for health reasons, she then was able to extend for purely political reasons. And it was such a blatant example of why what they started, you know, again, in the name of safety, was just so horrific.
Yeah, just completely arbitrary and capricious, the definition of it. And we were seeing all across our country.
Right. All right, we're going to get off of COVID and get back to Austrian economics. Crystal asks, what kind of government regulations do you think we need to implement to allow an Austrian style of economics to work in the US? And how can we limit government influence in our economy?
Those regulations should be directed towards government, not the private sector. That's the first thing. We need to roll a lot of the regulations back. Government's role in a free market economy is simply to protect property rights and enforce contracts. That's pretty much it. So the regulations, and that's another thing that, that's another reason our country is suffering, is just we are regulated to death. Here in East Tennessee, we're the home of nuclear energy, right? And there's a lot of talk about nuclear. Well, the problem is that the United States is in the bottom third of countries in the time that it takes to bring a nuclear power plant online. And the reason is just because of ludicrous regulations. That's just one example of how regulations hurt us. You have direct loss of money, but then there's also indirectly, it's impossible to calculate the opportunity costs that overregulation have caused. So I would say that those regulations, it needs to be aimed at things that actually put the government back into its box, as opposed to more regulations on the market and on us.
A big part of Friedrich Hayek's work later in his career was about how people peacefully cooperating with each other come up spontaneously with ways of governance. And I think one of the key Austrian concepts for me is the difference between government, more regulations, more top-down, more dictating how people live their lives, versus governance, which are the rules like don't hurt people and don't take their stuff, that allow for civil society to thrive. So when I hear regulation, I think of government telling us what to do. But when I think of the rules of society, that's very much part of the Austrian canon, because they understand that free people come up with ways to come up with solutions to things in a way that government just can't know to do the right thing.
I 100% agree. There's a difference between governance and government. And what happens all too often is government gets in the way of good governance. Bad government gets in the way of good governance.
All right. So which U.S. president do you think had the best understanding of economics, and when are you going to run?
When you look back, it's actually the presidents that didn't do, the historians will rank presidents based on how activist they were. Okay. So you see someone like FDR, he's a great president because he did all this stuff. Well, he prolonged the Great Depression. He caused a lot of issues by doing all those things. So for someone like me, it's going to be the presidents that really didn't do a whole lot, like Calvin Coolidge and Harding and those guys, that just kind of let things go. I mean, one of the very interesting historical episodes is during the Great Depression. Had all this government intervention, and now historians look back and say, well, that was necessary. Well, previous to that, just a few years before, there had been a very serious downturn. The government didn't get involved. The economy righted itself, and things were back within 6 months to a year. It was just part of a normal business cycle. So for me, it's probably going to be the people that aren't the great presidents because they don't try to micromanage and control the economy.
So in other words, President Kane will be the best.
There will be no President Kane.
Oh, come on. So many hearts were just broken.
Sorry.
Where'd that question go? There it is.
So how was it reconnecting with Linda McMahon this week?
It was awesome. Linda is an incredibly sharp lady. Her mission is to work herself out of a job by dismantling the Department of Education and returning power over education to the states, which is something that I would definitely like to see. In Tennessee, we just passed universal school choice last year. It was amazing because we had 20,000 scholarships available. 38,000 families applied for those 20,000 scholarships. So the demand was huge. One of the most important things, I think, we were talking before about lost opportunity and how to be able to calculate that, is within our education system, because everything is top down from Washington, D.C. Districts, localities, and states, they can't really experiment and try different things and compete with one another, and we don't know how much we've lost with what are the best ways to teach our kids. And obviously, I think that evolves, just what society and culture, and, we have AI and smartphones, which we didn't have when I was a kid, but nevertheless, educators, the art of education has been destroyed because of the bureaucracy. So I think that as we see, hopefully, power returning to the states, it'll give the states the ability to be more flexible and localities and to try different things.
I feel like President Trump had some wisdom selecting someone with experience in professional wrestling to take on the teachers unions.
That's about right. But they're adamant that they're moving forward. And they've made some cuts and done some things. And, she said that was her mission. So I believe that and look forward to it.
So we talk about this in the series, and I think I butchered his name, but Renato Moicano, the Brazilian MMA fighter, took the mic and the stage and said, read Ludwig von Mises. This is a question. Is there a correlation between combat sports and economics?
Maybe we just have more sense than people think we do. I don't know. No, there's not. I mean, you can actually see it in other areas as well. Obviously, most people aren't going to have a platform to, after an MMA fight, grab the mic and say, read Mises. But nevertheless, I do run into people from many different walks of life who are at least aware of the Austrian School and some of the ideas. I would attribute a lot of that to Ron Paul and the fact that the campaign did something more important than winning and putting him in the White House. The campaign launched the movement, and we still see that today. I don't think that we would be sitting here talking, and I don't think that we would have as many people listening and watching as we do if it hadn't been for Ron Paul and everything that he did in 2008, 2012, and before and since.
So along those lines, I have a call to action to everybody watching this. Part of the reason we did this series with Glenn and wanted to really sort of emphasize his voice is that Logan and I are working on a academic manuscript for Cambridge University Press called Austrian Economics and Popular Culture. And we're going to interview Dr. Paul. I'm hoping to interview Dave Smith. Obviously, I've interviewed Glenn, a number of other people. If you have ideas for people that are great explainers of Austrian economics and popular culture, send me their names, tweet them at me, email them at me, whatever you want to do. It's mkibbe@freethepeople.org, because we're going to follow the breadcrumbs all the way back from Frederick Hayek and the Road to Serfdom to Leonard Read starting the Foundation for Economic Education, Murray Rothbard, my professor at Grove City College, Hans Senholz, who also was a mentor to Dr. Paul, to the modern biggest voices out there. I think it's a cool story, and we want to tell that story. Glenn, we got one more. Okay.
Yep. So here's a great question from Sean McMahon, who is a good friend and great supporter of our work here at Free the People. He also might be the person that started the drinking game anytime a dead economist was mentioned when we were doing Liberty Pubs, some live conversations during lockdown. So he asks, understanding that this question is like asking which would win, a polar bear or a cassowary bird? I'll ask anyway. Who would win in a cage match between you and Tyrus?
Oh, I don't know. Tyrus is pretty tough. And he's much more in ring shape than I am nowadays. So he would probably be the polar bear in that particular. I guess, right? I don't. What kind of bird was that again?
A cassowary? I don't know. I'm gonna have to drop
that's,
it.
That's over my head. Like,
yeah, it doesn't sound like a very big vicious bird. So I'm assuming that the polar bear is going to win. Unless he's saying I'm so fast and able to move so quickly and agile that I can just evade the whole time and fly out of the cage match. I don't know, but
I'm going to quote Ali: "Dance, what is it? Dance like a feather, sting like a bee.
Well, like a butterfly, sting like a bee." That's
go.
right.
I got most of it.
But I'm glad you brought up Tyrus. He is a good friend of mine. I get to go on the Gutfeld show, which is the highest rated late night show in the country. And he's the reason why he got me on the show, and I've become a regular. So that's pretty cool. And he's a really good guy. Tyrus is. So I appreciate what he's done for me.
So we probably won't see a death match on Gutfeld.
I don't know, man. You never can tell what they're going to do on that show.
I kind of feel
they surprise me every time I go on.
I don't know. I feel like if you brought it up to Greg, he'd be all in.
Yeah,
he would. Yeah. I'm sure he would. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
All right. I'm not really sure that there's any questions that we can bring up that would be the appropriate to follow up that last one. So do you have any final thoughts, Glenn?
As I said earlier, I think one of the most important things about Austrian economics is it really gives you a view of the real world and how things really work. And if nothing else, it's not hard to understand, seriously, if I can do it, pretty much anyone can, but it helps in many different areas, not only for and understanding what's going on in the world, your personal finances as well. It can help make investment decisions. One of the most important things, and I'm not an investment advisor, so don't take my advice. One of the most important things is figuring out, where the money that the government prints, where is that flowing into, and to get into those sectors ahead of time, because that's really, unfortunately, what drives a lot of asset prices in the modern world. But it helps us understand how everything works. And again, you'll have more confidence when you hear someone on TV talking right over your head and you realize they're doing that on purpose. And what they're saying is a pseudoscience, it's alchemy, and you actually know the real deal.
Love it. Love it.
Kibbe, any thoughts?
Nope. I think this is the beginning of a project that I've been obsessed with. I've always wanted to take what we do at Free the People, which is translate important ideas on liberty, on economics, and turn them into stories and things that are actually compelling entertainment for people. And it was a real honor to work with you, Glenn, because I think you cross over in these two worlds. Intellectually strong, a great storyteller,
physically strong,
and also kind of a badass in the ring. And that to me is like everything you need to make this project work.
Well,
all right. Sorry, go ahead, Glenn.
No, I'm sorry. Thank you. I appreciate that.
All right. So I want to thank everyone for joining us. It's Friday night. I can't personally think of a better way to spend a Friday night than with these two guys talking about dead economists. But let you go and enjoy your evenings. You can watch the full series now at freethepeople.org/WWE. Go to our website, watch the series, sign up for future announcements about different products that we're going to be releasing, and also follow us on YouTube at Free the People as well.
Yeah, go to the fridge, get a can, get a bottle, and binge watch series right now, because there will be a quiz tomorrow. Okay, thank you, Glenn.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everybody. See you later.
Bye-bye.